So because we're focusing on St. Paul's letter to the Romans this summer, I'm going to have to ignore the gospel lesson this morning. And I know that's probably a disappointment for everybody that wants to know about stewardship and investments and where your 401k is going to go after the election and all that. But sorry. We need to talk about this real important chapter in Romans, which has to do with the Jewish people. And right now you're thinking, I don't particularly care about them. But nevertheless, it's important. I'll tell you why in a little bit. St. Paul is talking about the Jewish people because they're very dear to his heart, because they're his peeps. I mean, his folks, okay, his group, his people. Everybody these days is so interested in their ancestry. Where did we come from? Ancestry.com and what our DNA shows, and did you come from where? I don't know. India, China, Germany, Czechoslovakia, France, Madagascar, who knows? I don't know. What's your combination? That's what we all want to find out, okay? What we don't want to find out is, are you actually a direct descendant of Attila the Hun? Would you really want to know that? Are you a direct descendant of Charles Manson? You don't really want to know that, probably. Okay? But that's what people want to know. Who are we descended from? Because for some reason or other that's important to us. It was important in St. Paul's day for him to know that he was Jewish and he was very fond of his people. We also do that and say that. My family will get together at the end of September and say, it's the Cahill family, and we all are Irish, even though the Cahills have not been born in Ireland for 200 years. We're born in the United States, but that's the way it is. So St. Paul was a Jewish person. I mean, that's very important to them. And yet, as far as the Jewish people were concerned, they were cut off from the promises of God because they rejected Jesus. And that broke his heart. It just broke his poor little heart. I mean, in some other parts of even this letter, he says, I got to tell you, I'm as Jewish as they come, but it breaks his heart that his people cut themselves off from the promises of God. So what are you supposed to do with that? How do you deal with that kind of disappointment? Well, it kind of works out this way. I don't know if you have this opportunity, but we have had through the years. We've had a number of apple trees and plum trees in our yard. Not olive trees, but fruit trees. And I don't know if you've had, we've had them, we still have a few, but when we've cut them down, they don't stay cut down. Unless you take the stump grinder and grind the roots out, they don't stay cut down. They come back the next year. You cut the stump off, and you leave it, you go, okay, that one's gone. Next year, there are sprouts, especially apple trees and plum trees. They come up around them. They just sprout up around. And that's true of a lot of fruit trees. And I guess olive trees do the same thing. You just have to grind those rascals right out if you want to truly get rid of them. Now, that's a good thing for apple trees, maybe not so good for lawnmowers and property owners, because you really have to dig those rascals out. But what St. Paul says is this. Think of an apple tree, or in his case, an olive tree. Think of a tree like that maybe seems like it's doing pretty well, but it gets broken off in a windstorm. And maybe it's been a really good tree for you. Maybe it's had lots of apples or lots of fruit. Or, Leona years ago used to have a nice peach tree in her front yard. It was a beautiful peach tree. It had lots of beautiful peaches, and when the peaches came out, so did the bats. That's how we knew it was bat season, because it was peach season. Okay? But anyway, but suppose a windstorm comes along and just snaps off that beautiful tree that you loved and had all this. And then what are you supposed to do with this thing? Well, in the case of fruit trees, you can go to another, the tree is not done. You don't have to dig it out. You can go to another similar fruit tree and cut off some branches from that other fruit tree and graft them into the stump. Okay, you make cuts in the bark of the stump and you stick the branches in there, and then you put mud and stuff over them, and they'll grow in that stump like new branches. Okay, so you'll save the apple tree that way, and it'll grow up like a new apple. They've done that to olive trees for centuries. That's what Paul talks about. They've done that to apple trees for centuries. In fact, in California, hundreds of years later, after St. Paul, in California, hundreds of years later, the American scientist Luther Burbank created a whole industry out of grafting fruit trees. And that's how we get partly how we get all the varieties of apples that we have. From just cutting branches from different types of apple trees and sticking them onto different other kinds of apple trees, and just letting the bees go from one apple to another on the same tree. I mean, it's wonderful stuff. But that's what you do. You just go, and St. Paul said, in that case, you go from wild olive trees, you go get some branches and you stick them onto the stump that was cut off, and they'll grow. And it seems like you have a whole new tree, but you really don't. You just have new branches on that stump that's there and that root that was there. And that's what God did when it seemed like the people of Israel rejected the gospel of Jesus. Because the whole idea was that it wasn't the ancestry that was important. It's not like if St. Paul went on Ancestry.com, if they had such a thing in his day, and he could trace his ancestry all the way back to whoever it was, Judah and Jacob and whoever the tribes were that he came from. Who cares? That's not important, ultimately. What's important is that God promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, I will be your God and you will be my people. That was the promise. And to Abraham particularly, trust that promise. And we just heard a couple weeks ago Paul saying, it was because of the faith that we have. It's because Abraham believed that God said, that's the righteousness. It's Abraham's faith. Abraham believed and God counted it to him as righteousness. And so everybody who believes the promises of God, God counts that righteousness to them. So here we all are. None of us are Jews. Well, maybe some of us might have some Jewish ancestry, but that doesn't matter. It's because we believe the promises of God. We're like those branches that God got from other trees grafted onto the stump, because the people originally there, the original Jewish people, they broke off like in a windstorm. It's even worse than that. It's kind of like, if you have a cartoony imagination, it's like you imagine this in a cartoon, or like a weird sci-fi kind of computer-generated movie. Imagine the branches on the tree breaking themselves off, saying, we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. And they just kind of snap themselves off the tree, okay? And then what are they supposed to do? What do? They just lay there on the ground going, oh good, we don't have anything to do with the tree anymore. And you look at them and go, well, you dopes. You're not attached to anything, you're not getting nourishment, you're just kind of laying on the ground. They're like, we don't care, we're not attached anymore. That's what we want. Duh. So God said, I'm going to attach new branches, and that's us. That's St. Paul's mission. That's this whole story. Read the book of Acts. That's what he does in the book of Acts. He goes from town to town to town. He goes into town. He goes to the synagogue where the Jewish people are, and he says, here's the promise of God, and it's fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Now, that's the deal, guys. Believe in Jesus Christ, and you'll be saved. They go, we don't have anything to do with that. And you hear the sound of snapping limbs as they break themselves off away from the promises of God and go clunking to the ground. St. Paul says, fine, God told me I'd go get some more branches from some other place. He goes out in the marketplace, he gets branches that are Greek, he gets branches that are Scythian, he gets branches that are Macedonian. He didn't care where they get, just, you guys believe the promise of God? In Jesus Christ all people will be saved? Sure, we'll believe that. Okay, fine, stick them in there and they grow and the church grows. And Jesus promised, remember this one? That the church would grow until it becomes like a tree in which all kinds of birds come and nest in its branches. Just marvelous. It's wonderful. But, here's the other part of the promise, and this is another good promise in here. He says, what about those branches that are laying on the ground? What if they someday change their mind and say, hey, we want back in? Is there still room for them? Or does God say, yeah, you had your chance, now there's no room for you guys anymore, sorry, you're out? No, there's room for them. Of course there's room, because the tree is a living, breathing organism. And if you've ever had an apple tree in your yard, it's always growing, it's always doing things, unless you're trimming it back or something. I mean, we never trimmed our apple trees. Okay, they were always growing. There was always places to put new branches in. And those branches might come back and say, we want in. You can put those in. You can reinsert them and regraft them in, and they'll grow with the rest of them, as long as they haven't died off completely. That's one of the marvelous things about the faith. It's a marvelous thing about the church, and that's the thing that Paul held up hope for his people, the Jewish people. Someday, if there are any Jewish people that would say, you know what, I've changed my mind. I think I'd like to believe in Jesus after all. Sure, there's room for you on the tree. Sure, there's room for you in the house of God. Sure, because it's not about your ancestry. It's not about really about your faith or not. It's about the promise of God. God said, you believe the promises that I have made to you. That's all it is. You believe those promises. Now, this could be just a sort of a, if we stop there, it could be just a sort of a academic, historic exercise sort of lecture, I guess, about whether or not the Jewish people will ever be saved or whether they'll come back and all that kind of stuff. That's not the best way to deal with it. Because I'm not a professor at a seminary and I'm not a historian. You aren't students like that either. We're just a bunch of folks here and I'm your pastor. But I think we could say this. Over 30 years as a pastor here and all over the place, I've had conversations with people that have gone like this. Pastor Cahill, I don't know what to do about my kid. I brought him up as a Christian. I brought him to church. They were baptized. I brought him to church every Sunday. I brought him to Sunday school. I got him confirmed. I brought him to Christian day school or Catholic school or whatever school it was. And they did all these things. And I thought I did the right thing. And I prayed for them. And they were in church and all that. But I don't know, Pastor Cahill. You know, long about the time they got to around college or 20, 25 years old or something, they started to just kind of float off. Do something weird. Get into all these strange things. Next thing you know, they're not, you know, oh my, I don't even believe that anymore. And oh my, I'm just not even going to church anymore. And oh my, you know. And the next thing, you know what they told me the other day, Pastor Cahill? Mom, you know what? I don't even believe in God anymore. And you know what, Pastor Cahill, I just don't even know what to say about that anymore. What do you think about that? And I don't know how many times I can tell you that I've had that conversation with parents over 30-some years. And parents are just like, I don't know what to do. We thought we did all of this stuff right. And we thought we nurtured them, and we thought we prayed for them, and we thought we brought them up, and we thought we did all. And the kids come along and go, you know what, Ma, I don't even believe in God anymore. It's always Mom that they tell this to. They never tell this to Dad. It's always Mom they tell this to. I don't even believe in God anymore. What are you going to say? I think some days I want to say, you know what? If you had a dog that you wanted to give to your kid as a gift, you give that kid the dog, you teach him, here's a dog, here's what you do to take care of him, you have to feed him, you have to give him water, you have to do all this kind of stuff to keep that dog strong, healthy, take him to the vet, give him proper medications. Eventually you turn that dog over to the child and say, here's your dog, now you take care of him. But if the child stops feeding the dog and doesn't give the dog food for a long enough period of time, what's going to happen? The dog is going to starve to death. Is it going to be your fault because you didn't teach the dog how to take, or child how to take care of the dog? No. But the dog is going to starve to death. So I say once in a while to parents, you know what? If your child who knows how to pray and how to go to church and how to read the Bible and how to go to Bible study and how to hang around other Christians, if they don't do that stuff, then what have they done? Kind of starved the faith to death. But is it your fault? You've taught them to do that. Is it your fault they haven't done it? Well, no. They've kind of starved that faith to death, and when they do that, the branch just kind of drops off the tree. You hear the sound of the branch cracking, and it falls off the tree. But the good thing about the promises of God are this. Somewhere along the line in that kid's life, it's not that you taught them, and it's not that they learned and forgot, and it's not that they rejected or anything like that. Somewhere along the line in that child of yours life, I might say to a parent, God made a promise to them. And God's promise to them was, you're mine. And I won't forget that. And maybe the promise looked like, and even looked like something like this. The pastor made the sign of the cross upon the forehead and upon the heart to mark you as one redeemed by Christ the crucified. And you might not want to believe in him, but you're marked. And you belong to him. And nothing is going to remove that mark. And whenever God looks at you, he sees that and he says, you're mine. Until the day you die, and that's your last chance. But as long as you live and move and have your being, you belong to him. And there's always the opportunity to get regrafted back in. And there's always room for you to get regrafted back in. There's always a place for you back in the tree. And there's always the opportunity to put one more branch back in, and you might be that branch. And maybe that's what we have to say to one another and to parents, and to say, here, we got room here for that child to come in. We got room in this tree, and God has room in that tree for that child to come back in. We're not talking about theoretical Jewish people here. We're talking about our kids, our people, our loved ones who maybe have, I don't know what, but there's always room to be able to say to them. There's always going to be a place. matter how you might feel about it. God's promise to you is, you've been marked, you've been redeemed, you belong to Him. So, there's always a place for you. Amen. Let's turn, please, to the Nicene Creed.